If you are out of the playoffs, get a DraftKings account, get a FanDuel account, and get locked in. The season really never does stop, especially here at FantasyPoints.com. Jake Tribbey, Thomas Tipple here, about to dive into the Week 15 DFS Early Look to give you a sneak peek real early at the top plays of Week 15. Lock in. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Truly insane outcomes for the games that were this week. There were some really awful games that still managed to be exciting down to the wire. The thing is every game is exciting down to the wire, Jake, when you're playing DFS and you're sweating some third string running back needing just a couple more points. That being said, let's get the viewers an edge here early in Week 15. Starting at the quarterback position, probably, if not the best quarterback performance we've ever seen out of one man. He's obviously the QB1. Some people might ask, why is this an advantage? It's more the outcome of the game and what's projected. So let's talk about Josh Allen.
Yeah, so I want to start by saying that I'm never one to pay up at quarterback. You know, you see Josh Allen's $8,500 DraftKings price, $9,500 on FanDuel, and it's easy to push yourself toward a cheaper option. But I also think it's pretty easy to justify playing Josh Allen this week. As you already alluded to, he's coming off the first 50-point quarterback fantasy performance since Michael Vick in 2010, and he's playing in the highest total game of the season. This game offers a 54 total. Over his career, Allen has averaged an absurd 31.7 DraftKings fantasy points per game in his 16 career games with a total over 52. Keep in mind, that would rank as the greatest quarterback fantasy season of all time if we treated it as a single season, surpassing 2019 Lamar Jackson, who averaged 29.4 DraftKings fantasy points per game. The matchup is a slight negative on paper, although we have seen the Lions notably struggle against rushing quarterbacks, and Allen's price is among the highest we've seen from a quarterback this season. So again, I understand if you have the urge to fade him for cheaper options, but as we saw in Week 14, sometimes we can just play the MVP caliber quarterback in the highest total game of the slate and print money as a result.
Especially when the other team is known for pushing the score no matter what.
Yep.
And with that must mean we have another player in this game written up here, and you're damn right we do. One of those players the Lions like to push the tempo with is Jahmyr Gibbs. Only price is the RB6 on DraftKings, FanDuel the RB10. Obviously, the Bills and Lions game has an insane total, so you're going to want to lock in players from both sides. Let's talk about why you have Jahmyr Gibbs here.
Obviously, he's been awesome this year. Despite being locked in a 50-50 committee with David Montgomery, he's still the RB5 on this slate by DraftKings fantasy points per game. And now he draws a great matchup in the highest total game of the season. Buffalo ranks as the third softest schedule-adjusted matchup for opposing running backs, largely because they funnel so much receiving volume underneath. They give up a league-leading 21% backfield target share. That should benefit Gibbs and David Montgomery to a lesser extent, as should the game environment. Both of Gibbs' best fantasy outings this year have come in contests with a total over 50 points. It's easy to argue other running backs are stronger plays based on raw volume because, again, he's locked in a 50-50 committee with David Montgomery, but the implied game total here lends itself to ceiling performances from nearly everyone involved, and that includes, I think especially so, Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, he's an absolute smash play every week. It's really hard to go wrong with him, especially not being priced as one of those top three options, but he can give you a top 3 week, really any game. Speaking of another running back that gives you top 3 options at times, who's not priced that way, especially with the news, the really unfortunate news, I feel sick for him, but the injury to Jonathan Brooks really just cements Chuba Hubbard in a workhorse role for the rest of the year on a Panthers team that seems to be a little nitty and gritty down the line here. Let's talk about Chuba Hubbard, RB13 on DraftKings, 16 on FanDuel, which seems aggressively low.
Yeah, Hubbard is currently the only healthy running back on the Panthers roster after, you already alluded to that Jonathan Brooks injury, which is extremely unfortunate. Raheem Blackshear also suffered a chest injury on Sunday. Now, we'd normally be concerned about game script and offensive incompetency for a bell cow running back like Hubbard, who's on a terrible team in the Carolina Panthers. But, I think those concerns are fairly minimal, especially in this spot. The Bryce Young-led Panthers are actually favored by 1 point here against the Dallas Cowboys, and Dallas has allowed the second most rushing yards per game and the seventh most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs this season. Hubbard averages 27 DraftKings fantasy points per game in the Panthers' 3 wins this year, and there's truly nothing stopping him from earning every high-value backfield touch this week. He's a guy that I'm excited to pair with the Panthers defense because, as you said, this Panthers team has been playing a lot better, and that lends itself to ceiling games from Chuba Hubbard.
Right, and with Bryce Young developing a little bit more and every single week, opportunities increase with Chuba. Doesn't have to totally rely on insane efficiency, which is kind of what he had to do early in the year, and he was still doing it. Let's move to wide receiver, and one of my favorites has been all year. Aaron Rodgers just weekly airmailing him as an alpha move, I imagine, just letting us know what he could do when he wanted to. It's Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 13 on DraftKings, FanDuel wide receiver 16, which, as you're about to mention, when you dive into the numbers, is a little bit asinine.
Yeah, since week 5, Wilson has been the wide receiver 3 by targets per game and the wide receiver 1, tied with Puka Nacua in expected fantasy points per game. Volume has never been an issue for Wilson, but his bottom 10 catchable target rate among players with 50-plus targets, along with general offensive incompetency, the Jets rank 8th lowest in raw points per game, have kept him from posting massive fantasy scores this season. Obviously, those are still risks in week 15, but this matchup with the Jaguars should make Wilson's life a lot easier. Jacksonville is the 4th softest schedule adjusted matchup for opposing wide receivers, allowing the 2nd most receiving yards per game and the most deep receiving yards per game. Wilson ranks top 15 among all players in deep targets, and he should have an easier time coming down with those against a very weak Jaguars pass defense, which should enable Aaron Rodgers to throw him some more catchable targets this week.
Just don't airmail him when he takes the ankles of the DBs. Aaron, please, for all of us, we need this. Talk about a big game wide receiver last week. If Josh Allen hits what he hits, there obviously had to be some weapons around him playing well, and the absolute yak god of ability of Khalil Shakir breaking multiple tackles. It was just a little over route, and he took it the rest of the way. You need that to go nuclear, and if you're already paying up for Josh Allen, why not the wide receiver 17 on DraftKings, the wide receiver 20 on FanDuel with Khalil Shakir again versus Detroit? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable to feel some fatigue, listening to me talk about every single play from this game effectively. But the game environment here really can't be understated. The game's 54 total is the highest of the season, and the total is 6.5 points higher than the next closest total on the main slate this week. We can say beyond any reasonable doubt that this is a game you will need some exposure to in week 15, which is why we're talking about so many players from this game. Overall, I don't love Khalil Shakir's profile. His position low, 4.8 average depth of target, doesn't really lend itself to big plays or ceiling performances when all of his targets are short area stuff. But he's partially made up for it with raw volume. Shakir has led the Bills in target share in 5 of his last 7 games, and he draws an exceptional matchup here. The Lions are the single softest schedule-adjusted matchup for opposing slot wide receivers, but closer to a neutral matchup for outside wide receivers, setting them up as one of the league's biggest slot funnels. Shakir should get peppered with targets, but I would generally prefer him in smaller field contests. I'm still a bit skeptical of his ability to put the slate out of reach, considering he isn't getting any downfield looks. But in a game with a 54 total, I mean, pretty easy to argue for him as a tournament option, even in larger field stuff as well.
Right, you're definitely banking on another big play, broken tackle, take to the house, but in this kind of environment, I think it's definitely possible.
Yep.
Let's talk about tight end and old reliable. The Chief, David Njoku, is locked in. Tillman still in concussion protocol. Don't know how that's going to go. They might be taking it easy with Tillman, leaving even more opportunity for David Njoku. This man is smashing tight end 4 on DraftKings, tight end 4 on FanDuel. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, Njoku has an absurd 28 targets over his last 2 games. That's the most of any player at any position. The 15.7 DraftKings fantasy points per game he's averaged since Jameis Winston took over would rank first among all slate-eligible tight ends and 12th among slate-eligible wide receivers. Despite this, Njoku is priced as the wide receiver 29 by DraftKings salary. And obviously he's helped out in week 15 by a favorable matchup. Kansas City is the 3rd softest schedule-adjusted matchup for opposing tight ends. We have elite volume mixed with a favorable matchup in an environment where the Browns will need to throw, as they're listed as 5-point underdogs here.
Yeah, and boy, throw they will.
Oh, yeah.
The running game is almost non-existent in Cleveland right now. We just want to see Winston chuck that ball 55 times and do wonderful things for our fantasy projections. Look, if you liked the video and are wondering where you can get the rest of the information Jake Tribbey is putting out, that link will be in the description if you're watching this on Tuesday or Wednesday and wondering where it was, or you can be locked into FantasyPoints.com when that article gets dropped. Should be tomorrow. With that being said, we wish you luck in week 15. Be locked in here next week for the DFS Early Look Week 16 edition. Good luck out there.